The following program is a sports handicapping show. That's right, we will be discussing sports betting and all kinds of other gambling stuff, including game predictions. As you know, not every bet will win, but we do our best. Feel free to use this information at your own risk, and remember, wager wisely, folks.
Broadcasting from the Vegas Video Network studios, live from the Las Vegas Strip, Covers.com presents Vegas SportsDay. And now from the sports betting capital of the world, here are your hosts, Teddy and the Professor.
It's Wednesday in Sin City, and you are watching the first ever special double edition of Vegas Sports Day, the pulse of the sports betting world. I'm your host, Teddy Covers, joined as always by my esteemed colleague, the Professor, Dave Malinsky.
As the music begins to play coming up today, why one college student may have to spend the next couple of weeks still flapping his arms. Some schools, they make you earn those scholarships. We've got a setting where it's not what Bo knows, but it's who knows Bo. And we're going to close out today with a case of one team that has no chance of catching a tiger by its tail.
I actually figured out two of the three references. The first one, though, I'm not sure what you were going for, but we'll find out as the show progresses.
Oh, that's an easy one.
Is it? I wasn't paying attention. You know, I tend to daydream while you're talking anyway. But
so do I.
The feeling's mutual. Dave, first take on a Wednesday. We had our first taste of NCAA tournament action yesterday. What'd you think of the show?
Well, some of it, of course, will leave you with a bad taste, but it's something we've talked about over the years in so many different forms. I got a chance to do it on this show, particularly yesterday. Now, remember we talked about when bad teams play bad teams in pick-em type games, there's a high degree of randomness that comes into play, even using the phrase, it's like laying $1.15 instead of $1.10. If you watched that first game yesterday, Mississippi Valley State and Western Kentucky, that's exactly what you saw. Two bad teams scrambling in the end game, neither stepping up well under the pressure. And that's that little warning. When you get involved in games like that, always remember that one in the back of your mind. You're betting good money on that. Now, a lot of times, of course, you just take the box score, take the final score, put them in your database, you adjust your power ratings. You don't see the visual. There was your visual. And that happens over and over and over again all season when bad teams go head to head. Yeah, it might seem like it's smart to say, well, let's bet these smaller teams. The markets don't know as much about them. No, I believe every little added edge you find gets eaten up in the randomness of what happens when bad teams are in a game with a chance to win. That was ugly basketball. It was compelling because it was competitive, but it was ugly, ugly basketball to watch. And I assume you were doing the same thing, watching some ugly basketball.
How could you not? You know, it was like a train wreck. You couldn't take your eyes off the last 5 minutes of that Western Kentucky Mississippi Valley State game. But my first take today, I don't know who to start making fun of first. Should we start making fun of the broadcast networks who said, oh, yeah, let's get that tournament started early. Make sure we have action on Tuesday and Wednesday. And they put it on the True TV network, a network that I literally haven't watched 1 minute of since last year's March Madness. There was no one in the stands in Dayton. There was no one watching that game. But NCAA tournament game, this one counts for the standings. Nah, you know, Channel 246, please. DirecTV viewers, of course. And then, of course, we have to talk about the, oh, goodness, Charles Barkley, Kenny the Jet Smith talking college hoops last night. You could clearly see that neither guy had watched a college game all year. You could clearly see that neither guy had a word to speak about Western Kentucky or Mississippi Valley State. But the scary thing is that even the ringer, you know, Seth Davis, who somehow has built up a career as a college basketball analyst, I don't think he watched anything other than Big East or ACC play this year. That was an embarrassing pregame and halftime reports last night from the TNT networks. Hopefully, it's not going to get any better. You can counter it. We're so used to getting good quality analysis. Here in Las Vegas, you get it. Here on Vegas Sports Day, you get it. Not going to find that, unfortunately, when you turn to the major networks for an event even as big as this one. All right, Dave, lots to do today. Let's get to it. Just a quick reminder, Dave and I have both posted our brackets publicly. You can take a look at what we've got. Covers.com/posting form. You can check those out in the Vegas Sports Day thread. Worth noting that both brackets posted were pre-Fab Melo suspension news. That being said, Dave, I don't think you would change your bracket, and I certainly wouldn't change mine.
No, we got the Melo news right as we were literally walking out the door yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Thanks to Matt Fargo, by the way, for sending that over for us.
Janitor was already at 15, which shows you how sharp he is on that. Couldn't even sneak that in out there. The bracket I've got posted doesn't have Syracuse getting out of their own region anyway, so it doesn't actually change. Maybe I might have them losing in the round of the Sweet 16, but I don't have them winning their regional anyway.
Yeah, me, myself as well. We're in the same boat. But you can find those brackets and check them out again at covers.com/posting forum. Quick takes on what we saw last night, Dave. All kinds of NBA action, and I don't know how much NBA time we're going to have over the next couple of shows, so we may as well talk about it right here from the opener. What did we have? 3 OT games last night.
A lot of OTs and teams that are having to come right back and play again tonight, so a lot of adjusting to do out there. You want to take a look at the minutes that the Lakers played in particular. The NBA being the NBA again last night. Think about this. No Monte Ellis, no Stephen Curry, and they just go and they wipe Sacramento out. Now, again, we told you in the past sometimes why that can happen is because, first, the other team lets down a little bit. Second, is the other team is not prepared at all for the lineup that they're going to see. So what happens the first night doesn't necessarily carry over into the second. Celtics go into Golden State tonight. They'll be a little bit more forewarned that Sacramento does. So you want to be a little bit careful about overreacting to that result. No, the Warriors are not going to be better without Curry and Ellis.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that trade last night between Milwaukee and Golden State. And I have to give the Bucks credit because they have gotten rid of 3 contracts that I didn't think there was any way any team would take any of these guys. They got rid of Corey Maggette, who was a cancer on that team and is now cancer in Charlotte. They got rid of Steven Jackson last night, which I didn't think was possible. And they got rid of John Salmons, the guy who they signed to that big long-term deal after he played about 2 good months for Scott Skiles 2 years ago. And then proceeded to do very little thereafter after he signed that contract. So I'll give Milwaukee credit for getting rid of those contracts, and I'll give the Bucks credit because I think this deal is going to help them. Not that Andrew Bogut is an easy player to replace. He's not, particularly on the defensive end of the court, but that team, Milwaukee, needs points. And Monta Ellis, for all that he brings to the table, the guy can score. And I think that there's a chance, at least, that Scott Skiles might be able to rein him in. When we look at the Golden State piece of the equation, we're really not going to know how this trade is going to work out until next year and beyond. Bogut obviously out for the season. He's had an injury-riddled career. And, another injury-riddled Warriors center that they paid a big price to get. I thought Monta Ellis might get them a little bit more back. But if Bogut's healthy, the deal works for him. If the Bogut is not healthy, then it is not a good deal for Golden State at all, especially picking up Jackson's contract.
The Bogut. Remember, Teddy at the Trop tonight. You can hang out for a couple hours. Most likely, just to be on the safe side, BYOW. Bring your own wallet. Just thought we'd warn you, just in case. Also, a lot of great college action last night on the secondary tournaments. And we broke down some of the things that you're supposed to be looking for in those games on yesterday's show. We think we may have one for you today, and we'll have to explain this a little bit to someone who doesn't get the tease. Hence, bring your own wallet. If you've watched St. Joe's basketball in the past, our favorite mascot in all of college sports, it is the Hawk. It's a live student in the Hawk uniform, and if you watch the games, you'll see that student flapping their arms the entire game. The old slogan being, the Hawk will never die. That can be awfully, awfully tiring. We've seen some games where St. Joe's went into overtime in the past, and these poor kids are just dying keeping that arm flapping. Well, think about this now. You get a scholarship for that, but now you have to earn it. St. Joe's moving on into the NIT tournament, and exactly one of those type of play-on teams that we look for in the NIT. No seniors, a lot of good young players. It would be a genuine reward to go on to Madison Square Garden. So this poor kid, who's dead and who's tired, may have a bunch of more games yet to go.
I didn't catch the reference. Well done, Dave. But there was one thing we talked about on yesterday's show, how many of the lesser tournament games had been bet up total-wise. We saw that in the NIT. We saw that in the CBI. Well, between those 2 tournaments last night, the NIT games and the CBI games, how about 9-3 to the over? So the sharp money that was coming in, pushing those totals up, was able to cash in that.
Well, there was one more bracket that didn't do as well.
No, not at all. The College Insider actually played to the under.
Played to the end. And keep in mind that in that 9-3, there was an overtime swing game.
Yes.
So on merit, it was charted as an 8-4. When you had the other bracket in, it was actually fairly close. A small winner, but let's say from a merit standpoint, if you take the 8-4 from those two, add in the other bracket, small, but not really.
Sure.
Not that significant.
But again, the College Insider Tournament a little bit different because it's all smaller conference schools.
But they also bet those over anyway.
They did. Oh, they did. I didn't.
Yeah. No, we just want to make sure that for people who are watching, if they want to try and say, oh, we found something, bet these over, worked out pretty well, but not necessarily an automatic.
So you want to talk about the Hawks, what we're going to use the Hawks for today?
Well, let's talk about the Hawks, and let's talk about also the other side of the equation. I always like to have play on and play against. These flat teams we told you about where it's spring break, you don't want to have to come back and play basketball again. Northern Iowa's played one game since February 25th. It was a disappointing season. The only game they played since then, first round of the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament, they got blown out by 12 by Illinois State. So the team had a bad season, got killed in the last game, saying, oh, guys, come on back. You got to practice, got to get on a plane. We got to go play St. Joe's. Now, coach, go without it. So let's give you a little bonus before we get into the NCAA tournament today. How about the St. Joe's Hawks tonight as a bonus play of the day? Game's been bet down to St. Joe's, a 6-point favorite. That's very fair. Like I said, there is a team that would like to get to Madison Square Garden. 3 good young players on that roster that Aiken, Galloway, Jones. This is going to be an NCAA tournament team next year. They'll start making that run for it this year.
Please keep emails coming in. We've had great emails this week. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of time on air to talk about them, but we're going to continue to answer emails on a daily basis. The address, of course, is sportsday@covers.com. Make it your show by helping us give us some topics and stuff you want to discuss. Again, sportsday@covers.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Vegas Sports Day. And as Dave mentioned, informal tonight. I'm just going to be hanging out at the Tropicana right here in Las Vegas on the Strip in the sports book. If you want to come watch the Cal South Florida game with me, come hang out, informal. We'll watch the game and talk some sports. Should be a lot of fun.
You hear the music in the background telling you to come dancing? Well, game by game, we're going to work out the kinks through the NCAA brackets. Up next.
Are you looking for the latest odds, the fastest scores, the most important trends, and the best matchups and stats? Are you looking for the key late-breaking information that can make you a winner? Well, Covers.com has the answer. The world's largest sports betting community gives you a front-row seat in the heart of the action, from the opening lines to the final scores. If you want to stay ahead of the game, Covers covers the numbers.
This is David Ivey from Pub Crawl. It's funny because this is David from. You should just leave it on. Hi, I'm David Ivey from Pub Crawl, and you're watching the Vegas Video Network. And scene.
Guys, it's tourney time. This special edition of Vegas Sports Day is brought to you by Covers.com. Remember, for all the key information you need in every sport, Covers covers the numbers. Let's start in Pittsburgh and get the lines up for the matchups in Pittsburgh on Thursday. Syracuse minus 15 over UNC Asheville. Kansas State minus 5 over Southern Miss. Ohio State minus 17 and a hook over Loyola Maryland. And Gonzaga minus 1 over West Virginia. Let's start with a little Fab Melo talk because obviously we're bringing up Syracuse and we have to talk about the Fab Melo suspension, a impact suspension down the line, but I'm not convinced that it's going to have a major impact here. Yes, Syracuse has no natural replacement inside. Yes, they didn't play defensively as well when Melo missed 3 games earlier in the season due to ineligibility issues, but is that going to matter here? NC Asheville's a team with all 5 starters, 6'5" or less? They're not going to push the orange in the paint anyway. So this is one game where Melo's absence may not be felt all that much, Dave.
You really may not see it. If we get the markets, in fact, to react anymore, remember, this was a 17 before Melo was suspended. If it gets down under 15, we might even look a little bit. Here's a case where the underdog likes to run. Scored over 80 points 18 different times. It's the way they have to play. But that's just a death knell going into Syracuse. Syracuse, as good as any team in the country at taking the ball away. They get a lot of pressure with that defense. Where they get into trouble later in the tournament, and they'll still be involved. When we come back next week to talk about the Sweet 16, they'll still be there. The problem is so much of that defensive pressure is knowing that you have Melo around the basket to block shots. You can be aggressive when there's a shot blocker. You can't be as aggressive when the other side can take the ball to the hole. This one, if the number drops a little bit, we're going to look Syracuse a little because, again, Asheville's going to run. Syracuse will run and finish so on the open. Remember, this team is still 9 deep, even without Melo. They'll miss him later, but they don't necessarily miss him in this game.
Yeah, and let's not forget that if Fab Melo's, I don't know what to call it, inept play, brainless play down the stretch in the Big East tournament probably certainly cost them a win and cost them a pair of covers, perhaps, in that Big East tournament. Melo did not play smart basketball on the biggest stage that he's been on this season. All right, we have Kansas State and Southern Miss, and this is a veteran Kansas State team, a team that has 4 NCAA tournament wins over the last 2 years. They certainly played better down the stretch. They played their best basketball down the stretch. They won at Baylor and at Missouri in the month of February. So battle-tested team, Dave, but the money seems to be coming in the other way.
So I can see a little bit of it based on full season stuff because Southern Miss is a scrappy, also a veteran team. They play hard, they play smart, they play tough. Problem is they're limited. NBA scouts, they're not going to Southern Miss practices. So what happens down the stretch? How about an 0-10 spread run if you only count regulation results? A team that's tough and scrappy started to look a little bit tired. And you just wonder about that aspect of athleticism, that they are mirror images of each other in terms of toughness. But over the course of 40 minutes, Kansas State a little taller, a little bit quicker. That does start to come into play. Our bugaboo here, though, with Kansas State, if the line drops a little bit, they don't make their free throws. One of the worst free throw shooting teams in this field. Anytime you're betting a favorite, and we'll say our cutoff point is usually 8 points or less, that mid-range favorite, odds are the game will be close enough late where those free throws could come into play. We don't want that notion of Southern Miss fouling and Kansas State not being able to close out. But right now, Southern Miss looks just a little bit long in the tooth, a little bit tired. Good season for these kids, but maybe they've already given all they have.
Well, exactly. I mean, when you talk about a team that, as you mentioned, Dave, on an 0-10 ATS run in regulation, they did get one, we'll call it a lucky cover as a favorite in overtime during that span. But when you're on that type of a point spread run, it says very clearly the betting market has this team priced incorrectly. Yet Southern Miss taking money here. And again, we're talking about a team that started out the season 20-3 straight up. I'll give all the credit in the world to Mr. Natty Light himself, Larry Eustachy. But the bottom line is they went 5-5 down the stretch in a very mediocre conference. Got a rare at-large bid in Conference USA. I'm not convinced that they did enough to earn it, and nor am I convinced that they're going to do much now that they have it.
Let's move to Ohio State and Loyola, and we'll talk about how sometimes statistics can be just a little bit awkward to work with. Loyola will come in as the #1 offensive rebounding team in the nation. That's good. They're tenacious. They go to the boards. You know what that's also telling you? They miss a lot of shots. And I think that becomes the problem here. In their conference, they can chase down those rebounds because they'll hustle. They've got a coach that instills that sort of play, Gary Williams' disciple. So they will play hard. Here's the problem. You're not getting those rebounds against Ohio State. A combination of size and athleticism both. Ohio State's going to force you into tough shots. You're going to miss those shots. The Buckeyes are going to get the rebounds, and they're going to get out and run with the ball a little bit. Problem is, how much does Ohio State want to run? One of the issues that Mata has, not a lot of depth with this team. So is he the type of guy who's more than content to get a win somewhere around the spread? Some other coach, if he's out there as a 17-point favorite, and if his team wins by 12 or 13, he's a little disappointed. Mata might be thrilled. Not extend his kids all that much. So even though I could see Loyola's offense breaking down for some long stretches, not in any hurry to look to the favorite here.
Yeah, I'd rather have the favorite than the underdog. I mean, in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, the MAC, there was really only one team that played defense. This is a conference that I paid a fair bit of attention to during the regular season. That team was Fairfield, the Stags, who Loyola Maryland beat to get to the title game, or to win the title, I should say, out of that conference. But the last 2 games they faced against a team that played defense, They scored 51 and 48 points. They were able to win that championship game 48-44. If you watch it, you know how ugly the back half of that second half was for those two teams. They kind of backed into that title, didn't make plays when they had to on the offensive end. And I think that Loyola, they'll struggle to get out of the 40s in this particular ballgame. 2 step-up-in-class games all year long. And one of them wasn't really much of a step up in class. They played at Wake Forest, lost that game by a dozen, which tells you they're enough right there. And then they went to Kentucky back in that stretch where Kentucky wasn't covering any point spreads. They were just a little bit overvalued. Lost that game by 24, get a point spread W for that defeat, but not a competitive effort anytime they've tried to step up in class so far this season. And let's not forget, this game being played close enough to Columbus. You know, if you've ever been to Ohio, you know the entire state is filled with Ohio State fans. So all of Eastern Ohio, fairly easy trip to get to Pittsburgh, not a tough commute from Columbus. So this will be a virtual home game for Thad Mott and company. Ola, Maryland, not going to draw a lot of crowd support.
The only thing that keeps Ohio State from getting more fans, they have to compete with West Virginia fans to buy the tickets here. There's an unusual draw here. A best game in this bracket, one of the best first-round games because Gonzaga and West Virginia match up pretty well against each other, but a pretty extreme advantage given to the Mountaineers here. Now, this potting system that the NCAA has makes a little bit of sense because a lot of it is based on merit. When we come back later today for the Friday games, Duke and North Carolina, both playing in Greensboro, yeah, they've sort of earned that. Kentucky playing in Louisville, yeah, they've earned that. West Virginia, at their seed level, earns a chance to play just a little bit more a little over an hour from campus on Interstate 79. No, Mountaineers will grab a lot of these tickets. They will travel pretty well. Doesn't look like this is factored into the line. I've got these teams pegged very even. Got the matchups pegged pretty darn even. I see West Virginia getting a little bit of an advantage from the crowd. But now here's your conundrum. Okay, this is not Mississippi Valley State and Western Kentucky. But close game. 2 minutes left, you may have freshman point guard versus freshman point guard. Now, what West Virginia will do a lot is get the ball into Truck Bryatt's hands. He'll sort of take over the point in the latter stages of close games. He's a senior. But if that doesn't happen, this is freshman versus freshman under the NCAA tournament pressure. Now here comes that added degree of randomness that sometimes we don't want to get involved with.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Gonzaga, Gonzaga has this reputation as, if not the best mid-major, one of the best mid-majors. And certainly we talk about what was going on a decade ago when the Zags were repeatedly upsetting top-ranked teams, making Sweet 16s on a year-in, year-out basis. They were that program. Well, they made one Sweet 16 over the course of the last decade. They've been upset as a higher-seeded team multiple occasions during this span. They've actually been NCAA tournament underachievers, not overachievers. That's the reputation. The reality, Gonzaga, underachievers. And you look at that Frosh backcourt. You look at Robert Soccer in the middle, a guy who has hasn't been the dominating low post presence that they thought he was going to be, a guy who is prone to foul trouble. These are issues for the Zags. We saw that all-freshman backcourt come up short, for example, in the OT loss to St. Mary's in the WCC tournament here in Las Vegas. But the bottom line, they played 87 of the 90 minutes in that ballgame. Those are the only options that Gonzaga has, and I think that may hurt them here in a game that is expected to be very close.
Let's move over to Louisville, Kentucky, and we could call this the Kentucky Invitational weekend here. It's almost going to seem like Kentucky home games. 4 good games on the board here. The Kentucky line just posted a little over an hour and a half ago a 25-point favorite over Western Kentucky. Connecticut right now 1.5 over Iowa State. Marquette 5.5 over Brigham Young. Murray State 4 over Colorado State. We'll take it right from the very top, and here's why we'll talk about the notion of betting first halves, betting full games. If you're doing some in-running wagering, different things to be looking for. Opportunity of a lifetime for Western Kentucky. You've won 7 games in a row now. You've got all this momentum. You get a chance at the Wildcats. So all this wonderful enthusiasm builds up, and there will come a point in this game where there's going to be an absolute thud. And here's what happens in these settings. Because of the physical fatigue, having played last night and played so hard last night, there's going to come a point against Kentucky where Western is going to be physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. Here comes the thud. And one reason why we don't bet a lot of these big dogs is you don't backdoor these games in the first round. Once you're out, you tend to be out. What the coach will do a lot, all these backups who ordinarily would not get into a game, they'll be in the game late so that they'll be able to tell their grandchildren, I played in an NCAA tournament game. Go look at this box score. Those last 2 minutes, that was me. That 0 for 1 with 2 turnovers, that was me. That 35-point loss, yeah, that was us. So, yeah, Western will come out with a lot of adrenaline and emotion early, but boy, as the game wears on, this could get really, really ugly.
Yeah, I'm not inclined to get involved in this game on any real level. When we talk about John Calipari and what he's trying to do in this tournament, obviously win a national title, but the way he's positioned himself, there's some ways that Calipari may have actually benefited from that loss in the SEC tournament to Vanderbilt. Instead of his team coming in fat and happy, now they're coming in a little bit hungry. And it's a Kentucky team that hasn't played a ton of close games this year. So the fact that they were in one and came up short, I think Calipari can use that as a learning experience. None of that's going to factor into this ballgame. But at the same time, we've seen this Wildcats team repeatedly fail to cover numbers in this spread range. They've been a point spread disaster in that regard this season. In fact, Kentucky, the single worst point spread team of the entire NCAA field, which is something of a surprise, obviously, because we know how good they are, but the betting markets have been a little bit ahead of Kentucky all this year. And at the same time, yeah, Western Kentucky, they may hit the wall in this game, but I watched that team rally from 16 down in the last 5 minutes last night. They did it throughout the Sun Belt tournament. They are not a team that quits when down, even against superior competition. Maybe they're running out of gas here, but we've seen enough out of the Hilltoppers now to know that their mentality likely to be in a good place. Their focus likely to be in a good place for this one.
Of course, if you find a prop out there, over-under shooting percentage, 30 for West. Here's a game where legitimately they could shoot in the 20s.
Yes.
Connecticut, now the favorite against Iowa State, 1.5, and the question is going to be why? Is this some false expectations? One of the things we do a lot, and we talk about it on the show, we listen to a lot of the media commentators set things up because we know the markets do. We know where those impacts are. And boy, it's so amazing when the brackets come out Sunday night, so many pundits talking about Kentucky, Connecticut, round 2, defending national champions. That may not be close to the reality. Remember, Connecticut last year was a 500 team in the regular season in the Big East. This year, they were a losing team in Big East play. They go 6-10 down the stretch, 2 of the 6 wins in overtime, 2 of the other 6 against DePaul. This is nowhere near that national championship. That was not a great team last year. Part of it is they caught magic at the right time with Kemba Walker, but also the luck of the draw in the NCAA tournament. If you go back and look at how Connecticut got through, they had some pretty favorable rides to get through. So it's not the same team. It's not the same chemistry. Iowa State does a lot of things right. The issue I have with Iowa State, and maybe at +2 or +2.5, we get just enough to pull that trigger. But do they have that mental toughness at the end of close games? A lot of transfers on the court, a lot of experience at other places, but not at playing together. So what we found Iowa State doing this year, scoring well at the end of close games, not defending well at the end of close games. You got to defend well at the end of the close game at this stage.
That actually hurt us on a play of the day here on Vegas Sports Day. We had Iowa State +2 against Oklahoma State. Ended up losing that game by 2. Couldn't get a stop when it mattered most at the end. I believe at the end of regulation. Yeah, that game didn't go to OT. 63-61? I don't know. I don't remember. But something like that. It ended up costing us a bet, that exact lack of defensive intensity. There's no question UConn's the better of these two teams defensively. But they're not the better of these 2 teams offensively. Iowa State, a bunch of different shooters, a bunch of guys who have the capacity to fill it up. And the betting markets, Dave and myself, we tend to like strong defensive teams over strong offensive teams. I'm not sure this is one of those situations. And especially, again, I'm looking for 2 in this game. I'm with you. At 1.5, I'm not convinced I can pull the trigger on this Cyclone squad. But the job the mayor did this year is really impressive in terms of putting together a tournament team and a point spread monster, mind you. UConn's been a loser if you've been betting them game in, game out this year. Iowa State, they've been big winners if you've been supporting them on a regular basis. So Hoiberg putting together this mishmash of a roster and developing them through the course of the season, they're one team absolutely playing a very good basketball, maybe their best basketball right now down the stretch.
And if there's a wild card here that will help us take the twos when they get out there, and I think we will see some twos, for all the talk about kinetic experience in last year's tournament, guess which player has the most tournament experience of any in the field this year? It's Chris Allen of Iowa State. Now, he got it all with Michigan State, not with Iowa State, but he's been there before. He brings that little added element. Now we move on to Marquette and Brigham Young. A comeback for the ages by BYU against Iona last night, but a fascinating comeback to watch. And if you look at the margin, they were down, and look at that final score, you think, wow, it must have been a wild scramble. They must have been exhausted after the game was over. And the funny thing is, it wasn't. They were just methodical. Iona being the classic example of a mediocre team having too many things go right early in a game and falling into bad habits. They got sloppy. They got lazy. So BYU just methodically just kept grinding away, went to a zone defense that was awfully effective. And of course, we're able to score at will around the basket because Iona was so soft with their interior defense. But now things change for Brigham Young. Now, instead of that soft, small, passive team, they got to go up against a Marquette team that's pretty darn tough and one that they don't have a whole lot of time to prepare for.
Well, that's just it. Marquette, a big advantage when it comes to the scouting issue for this ballgame. They obviously sitting in the stands last night, not on the floor, and with that extra time to prepare for both teams, and now specifically for BYU, whereas BYU still recovering from last night's win. And no, not gassed after that ballgame, but again, you give up 55 points and a half to Iona. I know they gave up only 17 in the second half, but 55 in the first half speaks volumes about the capacity that other teams have to score on this mediocre Cougs defense. And one thing we know about Marquette, we've talked about it here on Vegas Sports Day a number of times, that team is tough. Marquette builds a 25-point lead, they don't blow it. They're not Iona. They build a 10-point lead, they don't blow it. And we've seen them show that toughness in so many different ways, rallying from deficits on the road against quality foes, really bring it on the defensive end at home against quality Big East squads. Golden Eagles and Buzz Peterson, and this point spread range, it's a little bit cheap to me, Dave.
Yeah, one of the things we particularly like about Marquette is the fact that they bowed out so early in the Big East tournament last week, and Buzz probably happy that happened. His team doesn't have all that much depth, so instead of dragging through the Garden, they can come out nice and fresh. What you're going to love, though, if you haven't seen much of Marquette this year, and which BYU will have specific problems with, what a dynamic floor game. How about number 7 in the nation in assists on one end, number 9 in the nation in steals on the other end. They can get a lot of opportunities against a slower opponent. Tomorrow, they're in against a slower opponent.
Murray State, Colorado State, kind of an interesting game to talk about. And Colorado State in particular here, a team that I want to give a few minutes to, because this is your classic case of a team with a high RPI, a very high RPI, an RPI that almost assured they were going to get an at-large bid. And you look at their schedule and you go, this RPI stat's flawed. What did Colorado State do to earn an RPI in the low 20s? I don't know. They won one game outside the state of Colorado all year. That came versus SMU in the Stanford Invitational Tournament, what was it, over Thanksgiving. One game outside of the state for the entire season. Yeah, they had a pretty strong home floor. Yeah, they were able to pull a couple of upsets against quality teams on that home floor in Fort Collins. But when we talk about one win out of the state for the entirety of the season, that's not the type of team I expect to get at-large bids, and that's not the type of team that merits the RPI numbers they've gotten. And no surprise that since this number came up, this is one of the bigger point spread moves. Murray State, they were opened about a 1.5 favorite at bookmaker, a little bit higher in some other places. And we've seen nothing but Murray State money come in from the moment that the game opened. Now we're looking at 4s across the board for Murray State against the Rams.
Consider this, of course, to be close to a home game for Murray State. Again, running into the same problem Ohio State has. Ohio State has to fight West Virginia fans for tickets. Murray State has to fight Kentucky fans for tickets. But here's something we expect to see. Kentucky basketball fans are good basketball fans, not just Kentucky fans. Now, if Louisville was here in this bracket, they're not rooting for Louisville. But those Kentucky fans are going to be sitting there, they'll get behind Murray State. Murray State's not a threat to Kentucky in any way. They'll get behind the kids from their own state. Couple of things to watch here. Murray State has 4 players back from the team that 2 years ago lost to Butler by 2 in the second round of the tournament. They were that close to the Sweet 16, so they can play. Second part, and we believe this is the biggest matchup advantage, both teams shoot the three-pointers very well. There's a major defensive gap in how they defend the three-pointers. Colorado State, soft on the perimeter, 35.7% allowed. Murray State, 29.2%. They're so much better at defending the threes. As Teddy said, Colorado State, away from Fort Collins, there wasn't much there. And even look at some of those home upset wins in conference play. They caught a lot of teams in the right schedule cycle to pull those upsets. They were buoyed by the fact that the teams above them in the Mountain West were real good. They're not. You might want to have a little bit of Murray State in your pockets.
Well, we're a quarter of the way through the the second round of the NCAA tournament.
First round, those are play-ins, right?
I know.
We'll use our own nomenclature here.
All right. Up next, we're going to shift our focus over to Albuquerque, New Mexico, as Thursday's breakdown continues.
Hey, I'm Al, man. Is that how you get them to do that all the time? Just sit there and be an ass. Is that it? Hey, I'm Al. Hey, I'm Al Mancini at Top of the Food Chain. You are watching the Vegas Video Network. We got big forks, big spoons. I got a big mouth. I got no guests.
Livestream is your premier place to watch live events on the web, mobile devices, and connected TVs. See new events daily or broadcast your own at livestream.com. Livestream. Be there.
Let's go to Albuquerque and take a look at the lines for Thursday's first round, second round, whatever you want to call it.
First round.
We'll call it first
Yeah.
round. Let the NCAA call it something else. All right, we have Baylor minus 7.5 against South Dakota State. UNLV minus 5.5 against Colorado. Vanderbilt minus 5.5 over Harvard. Wisconsin minus 9.5 over Montana. Let's start with the Baylor-South Dakota State game. And really, this is a Baylor team. They took a lot of criticism from us on this show as we pointed out some of the flaws in Baylor's endgame. It cost them as a favorite repeatedly over the first half of the Big 12 campaign, but they fixed some of those flaws down the stretch. Certainly, they moved to a man-to-man defense that was much more effective than the zone that couldn't figure out why they were playing for a good portion of the season anyway. And the fact that they were able to execute late, big win against Kansas, big win against Kansas State, even in the loss to Missouri, played well down the stretch, and that was a big problem for the Bears earlier in the season, gives them some positive momentum moving forward.
Yeah, the reason why we're going to say first round, and that's going to be the Vegas Sports Day rule forever, you cannot possibly allow the Western Kentucky kids to say, we made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament. If you saw that game last night, no. They're not allowed to have that legacy. Yes, we made it to the second round. Not going to happen. Yeah, we love the fact that Baylor's out of that zone. Although it would have been a fascinating matchup here because South Dakota State, they can shoot. 4 different players shooting over 40% from three-point range. In fact, the guard you want to watch, Nate Walters, 21.3 points a game and 6 assists per game. It's not too often a kid can score in the 20s and dish the ball that much. It's what happens when you got good shooters out there. But now here comes a team that just played Missouri. What happens against, and played Missouri 3 times this year. You learn to get out on shooters out of that man-to-man. They'll get out on those South Dakota guys. Because part of the reason why they shot so well, they're in a conference where you're going to get a lot of wide-open shots. But now the issue, here's an athletic team. It's going to get out and guard you. It's going to beat you on the boards. And a big problem this underdog's going to face, kind of unusual at NCAA tournament time, they haven't left campus since February 11th. This is a sort of team that just might crash. We want to lay this a little bit. Baylor shoots the free throws well, which is good in that point spread range. The only fear, teams that shoot the three-pointers this well, boy, they're dangerous coming back through the back door.
Yeah, they sure are. That final minute of this one could get very, very interesting. Let's not forget, South Dakota State good enough to go on the road to Washington, not just beat the Huskies. They annihilated the Huskies in that ballgame, 92-73 final. Though, as Dave mentioned, Baylor and their 75% free throw shooting, that's on the high end. And that allows them to be in position, perhaps, to close this one out with a cover. I'm telling you, this is going to be an interesting final minute between Baylor and South Dakota State. Let's take a look at UNLV and Colorado, and I'm a little bit surprised how much money has come in on the Rebels over the course of the last 24 hours. UNLV opened in the 4.5 range. Now they're firmly 5.5, just about across the board. And we're talking about a team that had one of the strongest home road dichotomies of any team in the country. Played very, very well at the Thomas and Mack. Did not play well repeatedly on the highway, particularly in conference play. And UNLV, there's only one way they can play and win, and that's at a fast, up-tempo pace. Dave Rice designed this team to play fast, up-tempo basketball, and guess what? In games where neither the Rebels nor their opponents reached 75 points, how about this? 2-14 against the spread in regulation of those ball games. 2-14 ATS. So, Dave, the natural question is then, can Colorado score 75? Or will Colorado try to score 75? Or are they going to try to slow the pace here as much as they can?
Yeah, you remember from a show earlier this year, we used the phrase French 75. So that's the way we chart that angle. Also remember from that show, French 75, it's cognac, it's not gin. Don't let some bartender, short cheat you on that. Colorado, in Pac-12 play this year, 16 of the 22 games saw neither them nor their opponents get to 75. That's the way Colorado wants to play it. They will drag you down. Problem we have is Colorado often drags themselves down. It's that conundrum of wanting to slow the opposition down, but sometimes to the point where you don't score well yourselves. That Colorado half-court offense, that can be fingernails on chalkboard for long stretches of time. We want to play here. We want to be able to take 6. Hopefully being here in the Vegas market, we may have a better chance to find it here than you may have elsewhere. But there is that issue of Colorado scoring in half-court play. And also, that was 4 in 4 to win the Pac-12 tournament. When you didn't really have high aspirations for this year, was that really your final crescendo? Are you now just sort of happy just to be here at this point? That's what we want to find out. Is there actually still some adrenaline in those bodies, or did they celebrate a little bit too much in the Staples Center?
Yeah, because the UNLV likely to come into that game with a little bit of their chip on their shoulder after the way their regular season ended. The Rebels, they're coming to play, and the question is, are they good enough to win the game and win it by margin? Let's take a look at Vanderbilt right now versus Harvard. We've also seen the money come in on Harvard in this ballgame. Lots of money to the Dogs so far in this tournament. And, it's a Vanderbilt team that has lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. There it is, first round, and I'm already trying to correct myself in my head. First round loss in the NCAA tournament to a double-digit seed in each of their last 3 tourney appearances. Do we blame the coach? Do we blame the players? Do we blame the settings? Why has Vandy struggled so badly in these first-round games, Dave? And does it mean the Commodores come in focused, or does it mean they come in maybe looking over their shoulders a little bit, worried about another upset here?
Yeah, Harvard drew a lot of early money, and we could understand it because people had those 2 issues. Let down off Kentucky, and as Teddy said, that awful history under Kevin Stallings of not only not covering the spread in these early games, losing these games outright. Could it be that Vanderbilt is a little bit easy to prepare for? It's a terrific shooting team from the perimeter, so if you got several days to study the films, you know which shooters you have to get out on. And Harvard tactically was just about as good as any defense. In fact, tactically, maybe they were the best. Not the best defense, because Kentucky and Florida State, some of these have such better athletes. But if you take the athletes they had to work with and how they put their schemes together, Harvard was dynamite on defense this year. So with several days to prepare to get out on shooters, and what do you do in the Ivy League? Your defense is getting out on shooters. That's a shooters league. That's not an athletes league. Harvard has a good puncher's chance to play defense against Vanderbilt. Problem is it's not bettable anymore. The early markets cleaned it out. We only had Harvard at +8, which we never saw anyway. The 7.5s got cleaned out real quickly. At this price, there's not enough left. I don't know if it ever gets short enough, though, to shift gears here. I don't trust that Vanderbilt psyche, that recent tournament history, that weighs heavily on some of these guys because there are a lot of veterans there. This has happened to them before. And yeah, when you beat Kentucky, there is that little bit of a crescendo that can be hard to get back down from.
I don't know that I agree with you there, Dave. I mean, this is a Harvard team. They haven't played in 12 days. It's been a near 2-week layoff at obviously a time of the year that 2-week layoffs doesn't necessarily suit you particularly well. And it's a Vanderbilt team that was extremely good down the stretch. Remember, this is a Vandy team. They had injuries, they had attrition, they had all kinds of issues in November and December and into January. They're playing their best ball right now. And just like we talked about yesterday with Western Kentucky, where I wasn't in any rush to bet against them because I wasn't convinced that their current power rating number accurately reflected where the team was at, same story with Vanderbilt. I'm not convinced that the current power rating number for the Commodores accurately reflects where this team is right now. A team that was good enough to beat Kentucky on a neutral floor, and a team that, in my mind, should be good enough to beat Harvard on a neutral floor as well.
Take a look at Wisconsin, Montana now. Line sitting out there at 9.5, even though this was not a vintage theme for Bo Ryan. They just didn't have the inside play this year that he's used to having. Not only young inside, but not really a pivot presence on offense. Almost 36% of all of their points came from three-point range this year. That's pretty darn high. But boy, they're going to be disciplined. They're going to be fundamentally sound. They're so tough when you match up with them for the first time because of that Bo Ryan swing offense. It's one of the most difficult offenses for any team to prepare for. But now we got a little bit of a shift. All those great Bo Jackson commercials, Bo knows baseball, Bo knows football. Well, in this case, maybe Montana prepares a little bit better because they've got somebody that knows Bo.
They sure do. Montana assistant Freddie Owens. He played for Bo Ryan for 2 years, 2003 and 2004 at Wisconsin. One of those teams went to the Sweet 16.
Knocked down a big shot to beat Tulsa.
Sure
to get to that Sweet 16.
I actually remember that shot. That's funny you bring that up. Though I didn't know it was Freddie Owens. But the bottom line is Montana's going to have a pretty darn good idea of what Wisconsin wants to do in this ballgame, being that their coaching staff is very familiar with Bo Ryan and what the Badgers bring to the table. And as Dave mentioned, this has not been a vintage Wisconsin team. Outside of Jordan Taylor, there's really no reliable second scoring option on that team. Their rebounding hasn't been good. They haven't dominated the glass at all. They play smart. They play slow, which also means a little bit more difficult for Wisconsin to win by margin than perhaps a team that played at a faster pace. And Montana's going to look just like they do. They're going to keep it slow. The Grizz are not a team that want to run up and down the court. They're going to play tough, hard-nosed defense. Second trip to the big dance in the last 3 years for the Grizzlies. Key cogs, Will Cherry, Derek Selvig. Selvig, an interesting case. He's a 7-footer. He's not a real banger in the low post, but he could create some real matchup problems for the Badgers on the outside because he's hitting 43% of his shots from beyond the arc this year, and he's not shy about taking them.
He's a Wisconsin player. Like I said, these are actually mirror image teams so that they can put a good game plan together. Because, again, that 9.5 at the total that's posted out there, it's calling for a pretty high degree of dominance. Maybe a game we might even talk about again in a few minutes.
But first, let's close up on Thursday. We're going to talk about the 4 games in Portland. We have Wichita State, -6.5 against VCU. Indiana, -6 against New Mexico State. We have the Lobos from New Mexico, -4 against Long Beach State. Louisville, -7.5 against Davidson.
I hate this first matchup. Similar to what we talked about in the Bowls back in December when they get drawn, we wanted to play on both of these teams against somebody else. Give me Wichita against someone else. Give me Virginia Commonwealth against someone else. Now we're going to lose one of our play-on teams early. Let's start with the underdog case here. When you talk about the notion of a tough out, when we use that phrase, it's just one of those teams. It's hard to put out of a game because they will grind, they will defend, they will fight. There may not be a team in this bracket, similar to last year, that plays harder than Virginia Commonwealth. They can't shoot a lick. No one's going to the NBA. And yet look at this, 20-1 in the last 21 games, the only loss by a single point because they guard and guard and guard. For the full season, how about this count? 610 turnovers forced, only 333 assists allowed. That's one of the best ratios you will ever see. They will get after you. They have to because they don't have any other way to score. They have to steal the ball, get into the open court, get some transition points because when they have to set up their half-court offense, fingernails on a chalkboard. Just really, they don't have shooters. So you want to use them against an opponent, maybe a little sloppy with the ball, maybe a little overconfident, someone who will not match them for that physical intensity. Problem is, that's not Wichita State.
It sure isn't. We're talking about a veteran Wichita State team. They're deep, they're smart, they're sound. 4 seniors and 1 junior in the starting lineup. You have a couple of guys, Joe Ragland and Torrey Murray, both with over 100 assists for the season. And if they break the press, VCU is going to press. This is the type of team that can break the press. And then they should have a reasonable chance to score some baskets around the bucket. And they're going to force VCU to execute in the half court, which is not the strength of the VCU Rams. Again, we talked about UConn and the point spread being affected in some way by last year's run. And I'm certain this spread here is affected by, maybe that 20-1 straight-up run in the last 21 ball game certainly has an impact. But the bottom line is that VCU getting much more attention than they would and getting a shorter point spread than they would had last year's magical tourney run not happened. And as we all know, recapturing the magic from one year to the next in the big dance, not a particularly easy thing to do. Butler managed to do it, but that's the exception rather than the rule.
Move on to Indiana versus New Mexico State. New Mexico State, a team we'd like to play against. Not sure if we have the right matchup here. Just talked about how good VCU was in that aspect of forcing turnovers, playing a smart floor game. New Mexico State this year, over 500 turnovers. So I wish they had consolation games in these brackets, because if VCU and New Mexico State both lose, VCU would beat New Mexico State by like 20 in a consolation. They would steal the ball 35 times, be nothing but a series of layups. So how do you get here if you have over 500 turnovers? Because you've got a big, physical, NBA-sized front line and a lot of athleticism. When we talked about the tournament we had here with New Mexico State last weekend in Las Vegas, fingernails on chalkboard moments with them, because they will play ugly, they'll take bad shots, they'll throw the ball away, but they've been able to overcome it all year because athletically they're good enough. But now, if they throw the ball away against Indiana and take bad shots against Indiana, can they overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, the Mexico team is a team that I certainly liked more than Dave, who doesn't like them at all. And they made me a little bit of money this year. But you look at the entirety of their season. What's their best win? Probably came back on November 16th against New Mexico, their in-state rival. And, of course, in the rematch, they lost by 20 at home to the Lobos. They lost both meetings against Nevada. They got beaten on their home floor, and they went up to Reno, had a chance to beat the Wolfpack in the final possession. Instead, threw the ball out of bounds. Ended up Nevada sank both free throws and ended up failing to cover the number because of that mistake. And that's the type of thing that sloppy teams tend to do. Other step-up games, well, they lost at home to Arizona. Really didn't see a lot from the resume of New Mexico State that makes me think they're going to be able to go and beat Indiana. But at the same time, I don't want to sell this team short. They are big, and a lot of times in these matchups between the major conference squads and a mid-major, you're going to see a big size edge for the major team inside. That's not the case here. And New Mexico State, they're gutty, they're gritty. They're not a team that they can take a punch and bounce back. So I wouldn't sell them short. I give them a coin flipper's chance of hanging within the number.
Yeah, one caution we do have to add in, this is one of the biggest strength of schedule games in the first round. This does matter. Indiana played the number 19 schedule. They got toughened up against some real class opponents. New Mexico State, number 174. That's not a mid-major 174. That's a low-major 174. Next matchup also likely comes down to physical play again. Nice short spread here. We talked about Long Beach State on the show a lot this year. A lot of veterans, played a tough schedule, got toughened up by it. Maybe about as good a chemistry as any team out there, because you got so many of these guys who have played together for so long. And yes, Larry Anderson will be back for this tournament. But they got a tough draw here. This is another one we'd like to repurpose these teams against somebody else in the field, because Long Beach State will get out and guard tough. They'll be able to do something with their athleticism. But this one may come down to rebounding. And if you remember from a little postmortem we did on New Mexico a couple of weeks ago, a physically tough team down the stretch was doing a whole lot of rebounding.
I talked a little bit about Gonzaga earlier in the show and talked about how the Zags, they haven't been going to the Sweet 16s anymore. They were the upstart, the best mid-major upstart story a decade ago. And then the head coach left. Dan Monson, he went to Minnesota. Unlike every other coach that's gone to Minnesota, he found that he couldn't win there. And ended up here at Long Beach State, and he got this team ready for big-time matchups. Listen to who they played. I mean, non-conference slate. Pitt, San Diego State, Montana, Louisville, Kansas, North Carolina, Xavier, Kansas State, Auburn, all on the road in non-conference play. That's a coach who's getting his team ready for a run in March. And I believe that Dan Monson may well have that capacity with this Long Beach State squad. And again, we're talking about a team that has tremendous experience, a team that has great athleticism, a team that is very accustomed to tough challenges, and a team that can get out on the perimeter and defend. Really good wingspans, guys who can make their opponents take difficult shots. But you nailed it, Dave. This is bet on versus bet on. No way I'm stepping in front of the Lobos. I thought they were the best team in the Mountain West all year long. And you look at their numbers down the stretch, number 4 in field goal percentage in the country, number 17 in rebounding margin in the country, number 10 in assists per game, number 29 in assist to turnover ratio. If they can break down Long Beach State and get the ball inside, 49ers are not going to get out into transition. They're not going to run. They're not going to get the easy baskets they need. Classic bet on versus bet on, which is frustrating. There's a couple of those nice matchups between good mid-majors that we'd like to support. In this case, going to have to wait until round 2.
Last game on our Thursday bracket, and a chance to be a good one. Louisville and Davidson, an interesting matchup here. Rick Pitino and his team, they got no favors from the tournament committee here. 4-4 to win the Big East tournament last week. Not only forced back to play on Thursday, traveling the length of the country, but having to play an early game on Thursday. You would have thought that Louisville, because of their history, might have earned a little better setting than that. What a fascinating team to break down, though. End of the season, you can make a case that Louisville may have been as good as Kentucky defensively. Let's say Louisville, Kentucky, and Florida State, the top 3. Look at these numbers. Number 3 in field goal percentage defense. Number 7 in steals. They're not only impacting shots, they're taking the ball away. But then what happens when they get the ball? Boy, does it get ugly. 219th in field goal percentage. 260th in three-point percentage. 258th in turnovers. Note that in that run to win the Big East championship, they didn't solve any of that. That offense, it was hideous throughout. The defense was just good enough to get the job done. Now here comes that question. Are they up against a team that might be able to actually handle their defensive pressure a little bit?
Well, I mean, we've seen some good things from Davidson in that department this year. And again, this is a team that made a lot of noise with Stephon Curry a couple of years back. And now maybe there's some potential here for even a first-round upset. We're talking about a Davidson team that has all 5 starters averaging double digits. So they have the balance that we look for at this time of year. They have the pedigree. You betcha they do. They beat Kansas. They beat Kansas this year in Kansas City. They went to Duke and led Duke on the road in the second half. Didn't win the game, but boy, they were right there in there, and they gave Duke a nice punch before the Blue Devils bounced back. So we've seen them step up in class and fare well on several previous occasions this season. They're number 42 in the country in fewest turnovers. They handle the ball well. They're number 15 in rebound margin. They hit the glass hard. And if Louisville is not allowed to play aggressively, because again, when we talk about Louisville games, a lot has to do with how these games are officiated. Remember in the Big East tournament, the refs basically swallowed their whistles for the entirety of the tournament. That's why the whole tournament went under the total, and that's why we saw so many defensive struggles. Don't know that they're going to get that benefit here in the Big Dance. And if Louisville starts getting whistled for fouls because of their pressure, guess what? Davidson, number 9 in the country in free throw percentage.
Nothing wrong with little Davidson in your pocket. It's a sort of game where you're likely to find an 8, if you're in a public marketplace. But the best of the first round board, let's go to the Montana Grizzlies. We talked about the degree of dominance notion. Wisconsin doesn't play fast. They're not dominating physically. They don't have an interior game. It's asking a lot for Wisconsin to win this game in double figures. Montana can match up well size-wise, match up well in terms of athleticism, and that little edge that Owens brings, saying, look, I ran the Bo Ryan's offense for a couple of seasons. He was the 6th man as a sophomore, 2 seasons as a starter. He knows that playbook. Look for Montana to come in well prepared against Wisconsin here and be right in the game to maybe even win it outright to the final possession or two.
You've got a Vegas Sports Day play of the day for Wednesday. You've got a Vegas Sports Day play of the day for Thursday. We're not done yet. We're not even close, but we're going to take a short break. 5 minutes, in fact. We'll be right back with part 2 of this special double edition. You are watching Vegas Sports Day.